Hey, it's your buddy Peace and Harmony with you here today. Zooming in on the covert narcissist abuse tactics, and that is essentially the passive aggressive nature that we see so profoundly demonstrated in covert narcissist relationships. Covert is essentially a word that means hidden, concealed, undercover. It means that it's not easily detected, but is usually felt, acknowledged, especially after time. There's an awareness that something is missing, something is lacking, but yet you essentially tend to forgive the covert or concealing methods of this person they seem to make up for it in other ways. The charm, the easygoing nature, people tend to permit the covert abuse from this type of narcissistic individual because they're not so overtly aggressive, they're not overtly hurtful, they're not overtly punitive in terms of how they hurt. In terms of physical abuse, things of this nature, usually they're not prone to physical abuse or really a lot of aggressive verbalization in terms of smear campaigns and things of that nature. They're not overtly easily recognized, so people tend to be more permissive and accepting of this type of abuse. But when it comes to passive aggressive abuse, this is really it's a very indirect sort of abuse tactic. So it does have a compounding and accumulative effect when we talk about the insidious nature of it. And so really where the hurt comes in is the profound nature of the long duration of it that tends to be presented in a covert narcissist abuser. So what are some of the methodologies that we see to detect whether it's passive aggressive in nature? Well, for one, we see these sort of indirect threats that are, sort of a covert sort of hostility. So it's not an outward hostility that, you might feel somebody yelling, name calling, things of that nature, aggressive threats. It's more an indirect threat. It's more of an assumed threat. In other words, through things that they say or don't say, it's like an insinuated sort of threat, where you're not good enough, or you're off base, you're off track. So it's an indirect sort of intimidation that we see presented by a covert narcissist. And how do they do this? Through passive aggressive methodology. Well, passive by very nature means enacted upon. It means not expressed. Passive is just very much that. It's a result of inactivity. And then aggressive, on the other hand, it's that really tough dynamic that we see presented between yielding yet a negative. It's like a negative yielding, if you will. So the covert narcissist will very much yield to the requests of others, but then they will indirectly not fulfill them, or fulfill them in a sort of I would say just very insubordinating manner, or not really proactively fulfilled. So it's almost done with a very sort of quiet hostility, a sort of it's so in other words, things are not just executed in an efficient manner. So it's not that they're incompetent, it's that they feign incompetent. It's that they tend to muffle their hostility. And even though it's brewing inside, you never see it. They're very adept at keeping things very, very locked up, like Fort Knox. I mean, you would never know they held such opinions or had such hostility. And so thus we see the very, very pronounced passive-aggressive behavior in them. And so an indirect hostility that we see would be the fulfillment or a lack of fulfillment, which creates then a hostility within you. So, and then in turn, it's a vicious cycle. It makes you look like the bad guy, making you look like the one who's unhappy, and in essence, making you unhappy. And they, just allow that to continue, that unhappiness that they create. So you can essentially be, cloistered off, in your world, and really kind of leaving them with a huge gap, a huge disparity in the relationship. So it's not a very healthy dynamic. It's not very comfortable, and usually the one who is co-joined with this covert narcissist is the one to present into therapy. We generally don't see too often a covert narcissist seeking help until they've really gotten themselves in too deep, are suffering a health issue, they hadn't planned for certain events to transpiring, and then are looking to seek, some sort of true support, which they had hitherto been alienating others from in their relationship. So it is really an act of annexing people out, or isolating people out of their relationship, getting to know them, the true self, is very much an alienating, and there's another word that I'm looking for, where they really sort of estrange others, even though they're intimately related to them. So in other words, keeping them almost feeling like outsiders, even though they're intimately related in their relationship. So again, it's a very indirect sort of hostility that is placed, that is insinuated in their behavior, and it really is done through a lack of fulfillment of obligations. So it's very much, it's very hard to, call them out on this, because it's so indirect, it's so under the radar, it's so nebulous, so vague, and so it's very difficult to kind of smoke out this sort of abuse or have other people understand it. So I think that's part of the frustration with people who are trying to confront a covert narcissist, is it's very difficult to articulate something which can't be seen. It's very much an intangible experience. So it really does come with a sort of front-loaded way and method of handling it. So you really have to do your preparation and your self-protection up front versus at the back end of a covert relationship. And so a lot of this is trying to bring out communication from them, and you might feel like you're getting some sort of rage or kickback, or you might see some interesting expressions of behavior from them, which hitherto you had not seen, kind of like some pouting type of behavior, or frustration, or kind of like self-injury. And, you're like, I know you're competent here, but, you might see some of this emerge, and it's just because they're not able to really work out emotions as they relate to an empathy with others. So they're used to being so self-absorbed that they're only processing their emotions, and then they tend to shriek away from any sort of conversation that involves like emotional connection with other people, emotional accountability, emotional, bonding, relationships, which, if you're in a relationship or a coworker with one, you need to have some emotional connection and accountability, responsibility there. So that is exactly what really kind of brings out and upsets the covert narcissist, is when you hold them accountable, have some sort of emotional accountability to them. So you really do need to do that upfront work with them in terms of getting them, accountable in the beginning, and ask for, put some structure on it in terms of the accountability. And, if it's kind of repairing things from the past, or, something that's been going on a long time, for example, they're not handling their finances, or they've always put off this behavior time and time and time again. So, you just keep it very objective, very factual based, and, stated that, every time, we do this, or we have family together, you tend to always, go off and do your emails, or you're in the basement and, or in the garage, and, we don't know why you're there. So it just presents some concern. And they could be going and doing whatever. I mean, drinking, pornography, just, surfing the net. I mean, just in their own world, when they're supposed to be accountable and interacting with others. And it's because of the covert narcissists, they're very uncomfortable by handling certain family relationships. They're just not able to have that empathy and extend beyond themselves. So that's why they tend to retreat. they're just not comfortable in these relationships. They don't know how to express themselves, so you might have to be very supportive in that area. And and so just let them know that this is very important, and that you need to have some some acknowledgement here. And can they do this by a specific time, or are if they're not going to do it, just let them know that that they have been they have disappointed their obligations here, and this is very important. And we need to do something about this, because it's too much burden to place on me, or it's too much for you to not be responsible or accountable to these other family members. And then look at taking action steps that really fulfill consequences, because the covert narcissist is always going to try to get off of fulfilling these consequences. So the consequences might be an ultimatum. The consequences might be just some general general ultimatum. We can't continue to count on you for this. Then if that's the case, then we need to do X, Y, Z. So create some sort of consequences, and realize that this is a very important step towards you taking accountability and fulfillment for where you're at in the relationship in your life. Peace and harmony with you here today. I hope these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.